Thank you all very much for being here. It's a great pleasure of mine. Work over at Local 3 News just down at the bottom of the hill, and this is an outstanding way to spend my dinner break this evening. So thanks for being a part of my appetite, I guess you could say. One of the most important parts of our civic duty, I think, is choosing our local leaders. And while party politics may rule the day in Washington, D.C., here closer to home, we like to soak up as much information as we can to make the right decision. So let's get to it. Let's get our candidates out here. Please welcome Mr. Matt Adams, Mr. Weston Wamp. Our questions for tonight's forum were solicited via the website signalmac.org over a few days. They were compiled and gone over by a committee, then condensed and given to me. They were also given to the candidates because the purpose of this event is not kind of a gotcha attitude. We want an informed discussion and results by the end of the night. We also asked for some more additional questions as you entered tonight, and if there's time at the end, we'll select a few of those, and those will be surprises for us and the candidates. We'll see how that goes there. Just a word about how this is going to happen tonight. 2 minutes will be given to each candidate for an opening statement. The person who delivers that opening statement will be chosen by a coin flip. The other candidate will get the first question. That candidate will also deliver the first closing statement. They'll get a minute for a closing statement. For the questions, each candidate gets 2 minutes to answer and also an additional minute for rebuttal or response if that's necessary. We have a timekeeper in the back with some lights for the candidates to see that will let them know when their time is up. Of course, they can take as much or as little of that time as they like. Video of this event will be available next week on the website signalmac.org. That's signalmacc.org. So if you'd like to replay some of it or find a way to share it with your friends, you can certainly do that. And once again, we thank you all for being here. Let's get this coin flipped and get started this evening. I was handed a $50, and if you haven't seen one of those lately, you'll remember John Kennedy's on the front of it there. Mr. Adams, since you're first alphabetically, I'll let you call the flip. Would you mind?
Okay. Heads.
Okay. Heads. It's tails. Mr. Wamp, you will get the opening statement. And Mr. Adams, you'll get the first question and also the first closing statement. So, gentlemen, are you ready?
We're ready.
Good deal. Go right ahead, Mr. Wamp, with your opening statement.
Well, thank you all for being here tonight. What just happened was some deja vu for Matt and I. We had a debate this morning. In fact, at our debate this morning, which will air on PBS, I think, next week, I had a suit and tie on. But I left the jacket in the car. It's just too hot. But no kidding, we did a coin flip, and his heads was tails for the second time in one day.
Maybe I'll learn my lesson next time.
So better lucky than good. And I see Chuck and Joanne's eyes are back there, and I feel better about not having a jacket on. If short sleeves are good enough for Chuck Zeiser, then I'm fine with my sleeves rolled up. It's an honor to be here in one of our great communities. I was telling Channel 3 before we walked out here, I mean, you know, there's not really a place in Southeast Tennessee that embodies community better than Signal Mountain. And so obviously we both jumped at the opportunity to participate in this forum tonight and look forward to the rest of it. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Weston Wamp. I've grown up here, grew up in Hickson, live in Lookout Valley. My wife Shelby and I have been married for 9 years. We've got 4 darling little kids who would be here tonight, but they'd tear the place down and we'd get very little done. I've had a wonderful opportunity to serve companies here kind of at the beginning of my career for several years, was involved at the Lamppost Group, and then started the logistics-focused venture capital fund called Dynamo. And learned a lot about our strengths and weaknesses, frankly, in that process. Went on to start a nonprofit that's focused on long-term fiscal stewardship, good budgeting in government, and have had the privilege of serving on the Tennessee Board of Regents, serving our 1-year technical colleges and 2-year community colleges. We've got 40 of them in Tennessee, and they're almost all places that are full of life and young people who are changing their family tree. Many of them are getting their the first college degree in their family, and so I consider it a real privilege. We look at our work as workforce development. We're building Tennessee's workforce, and look forward to tonight's conversation. Thank you all.
Mr. Adams.
Yeah, well, thank you, Greg, for moderating tonight. Thank you to the MAC for hosting this event. I am Matt Adams, and I'm the Democratic nominee for Hamilton County Mayor. I grew up here in East Tennessee. I'm a seventh-generation Tennessean. We've been here about as long as Tennessee has. And growing up, I learned a lot from my parents and from my family about hard work and determination and giving back to my community. We didn't have a whole lot of money growing up. And so as a result, my parents taught my siblings and I the importance of giving back to our community with our time. And that's exactly what I've done from a very young age. Went on my first mission trip at 12 years old, was a member of my church's administrative board in its 200-year, youngest member in its 200-year history. I served as the vice chair of the Parks and Recreation Committee for the city of Calhoun. And then at 17, I enlisted in the Army, where I served as a paralegal, working in national security law, criminal prosecution, and criminal defense. After my time on active duty, I transitioned to the reserves, where I serve as an administrative law paralegal. And as a civilian, I work as a paralegal as well. So professionally, as an adult, that's all that I've done, is learn the law, learn regulations, and learn how things need to operate within the confines of the government. I realize that we have a lot of work to do here in Hamilton County. A lot of our residents have been left behind, and they've been forgotten by the people in charge, and they feel that they've been forgotten. And they want a shift in the status quo. And I promise you that if I'm elected the next mayor of Hamilton County, we will see a marked shift in the status quo. We will see investments holistically throughout the county to uplift our residents, to make sure that they have opportunities for long-term success, and that they can make sure that they are providing for themselves and every generation thereafter. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I've tried to group the questions into certain topics here. The first is kind of a get to know me. You've both given Cliff's Notes versions of your resumes, but let's get specific right off the bat here. Mr. Adams, we'll start with you. How does your previous employment experience give you the background to hit the ground running if you're elected mayor of Hamilton County?
Yeah, so early on, I had a resident here in Hamilton County tell me, anyone who tells you that they are 100% prepared to do the job on day one is lying to you. And I said, well, what do you mean? They said, the only person who knows how to be the county mayor is the county mayor. They said, you can learn and you can read and you can pick apart the policies and things like that. But the reality is, the only person that knows how to do the job is the person in that job. What I know for a fact is that I have consistently been the youngest and most junior ranking person to be put in positions throughout my entire career. The reason for that is simple, because I've been trusted by the people that were my leaders in the Army and after the Army with responsibility greater than my peers. And I promise you that if I'm elected the next mayor of Hamilton County, I will take the experiences I've learned in the Army, in public service, and in community service and service to God and country to make sure that we are doing right by our citizens. A lot of folks have said, well, you need a business background to run the county. And I say you don't, and here's why. Because the county government is not a business. The county government, the county, it provides services to the residents of the county. It's not there to make a profit. A business is there to make a profit. And so I promise you that I will make sure that we are being stewards of our budget and stewards of the services that we provide as a county to every resident.
Mr. Wamp.
Well, under Tennessee state law, the job of county mayor is a unique one. Most of the country doesn't have elected heads of county government. If you've lived in Tennessee like I have your whole life, then you may not realize how rare it is to have an elected head of county government. It's principally a financial position. And in three different capacities, I've been a steward or a fiduciary of resources that aren't my own, similar to the role of a county mayor as it comes to taxpayer dollars. In the private sector, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with raising capital and deploying it in a responsible manner with the hope that it compounds and brings a return to those who trusted you. And in my late 20s, raised an $18 million fund. Started a nonprofit that's focused on fiscal policy, mostly at a federal and state level. It's given me a good background in how you should plan for the future. I think it's probably one of the Achilles heels of government just at every level right now is almost everybody in elected office is just trying to figure out how to stay in office, and they're not willing to think 5 years out, let alone 50 years out. And then because county government is really state government delivered at a local level, serving on the Board of Regents has been a unique experience because the two-year college system, the technical and community college system in Tennessee is vast. We run a nearly $1.5 billion budget. I serve on the finance committee. It's an overwhelming organization to serve on the board of, over 100,000 students. We have campuses in almost all 95 counties. And there's so much interaction between county mayors and our system because we are, in many ways, Tennessee's workforce development college system. And so, in that sense, most of what I've been working on in the decade or so that I've been home from the University of Tennessee, I think has prepared me well to serve as county mayor.
Mr. Wamp, we'll stick with you. If you are elected new mayor, what will be, say, your top 3 priorities and goals, and how will you accomplish them? What will you do with them?
Yeah, but 3's tough. I mean, we've all laid out platforms. I mean, last year we rolled out the first planks of our Hamilton First platform, which I'm still quite proud of. I think it's one of the reasons that we got through the Republican primaries. We led with ideas. I think that one of the real direct additive ways that a county mayor can serve public education is through this concept of an apprenticeship program, which would be a partnership, as I've talked to Justin Robertson about it, where I'm not looking to get anybody's way, but I'm just trying to utilize and leverage the county mayor's office. That would be my goal, to bring companies towards an opportunity to serve in a very specific way our public schools and specifically students at 16, 17, 18 years old who are ready to work. There's a lot of leverage there. The school system, principals, leadership at central offices pulled in so many different directions that I think they would invite that type of connectivity with the business community. We talked about ways to bring parents in. I think sometimes we have disconnected county general government and public education. Public education is nearly 2/3 of what county government does. I think the parental input, we've talked about a parents' council that would advise, particularly on the capital needs. I mean, you've got a vast 74-school public school system, and I think it'd be helpful, particularly for a public school parent as county mayor, to be hearing from parents from all across the community. You know, a third one, we'll talk about planning. When I think about the future of this county, the future of the role of county mayor, one of the things that's going to change a lot from, I think, Jim Coppinger's run into some of these challenges. It really wasn't much of the job, much a part of the job when Claude Ramsey was county mayor, but the next county mayor is going to have to be more a planner than a county mayor was ever called on, because so much of the growth, particularly residential growth, including on this mountain, is in non-municipal parts of the county, and we want to take a different approach to how we appoint people to the Regional Planning Commission.
Mr. Adams, 3 priorities or goals, and what you would do to accomplish them.
Yeah, so the 3 priorities that we've laid out, the 3 top priorities, I always emphasize that these are 3 top priorities. They are not the only priorities I have if elected the next mayor. But the top 3 are public transportation, equitable investments in public education, and making sure that we are practicing responsible community engagement with the county government. And there are several ways that we can accomplish these things. With the community engagement piece, it looks like appointing a director of community engagement for the office of the county mayor. For far too long, we have seen a disconnect between our county government and the residents of this county. For far too many folks I've spoken to, they don't even know when our county commission meets. It meets at 9:30 on Wednesday mornings. And to me, that's wholly unacceptable. It prevents a more engaged community. So we need to make sure that we work to change that. With regards to public education, we need to be making sure that we are being responsible by investing funds that we're getting from the state and federal governments, specifically with COVID relief funds. Half of Tyner Academy's price tag is coming from COVID relief funds. So we need to be making sure that we are responsibly investing in what I believe are the 3 biggest priorities for our schools, which are infrastructure, both digital and physical, teacher pay, and solving a long-term discipline problem for Hamilton County schools. And the third thing is public transportation. Recently, we saw the bipartisan infrastructure deal pass, and we are going to be getting tens of millions of dollars to invest in our infrastructure needs here in Hamilton County. And one of the infrastructure needs that we have that has been far too long not addressed is public transportation. And it is a matter of not only infrastructure, but the health and welfare and well-being of every resident of this county.
Mr. Adams, we'll stick with you. Challenges are part of the job. What is the greatest challenge facing the county or county residents right now, and what plan might you have to combat it?
I think that it depends on who you ask as to what is the biggest challenge that we face as a county, but I would say the most consistent challenge I hear from residents is equitable investments in our public education system. For far too long, we've allowed certain schools in certain zip codes to literally fall apart. We have not paid our teachers a wage that allows them to want to stay in Hamilton County, and we have not properly addressed a discipline problem. When I talk to teachers, they cite those two things as the biggest reasons that they want to leave Hamilton County. It is not being paid enough and having discipline issues in their classrooms. If we solve those two issues and we invest funds that we're getting from the state and federal government that we've never seen before, we can see a world-class education system here in Hamilton County. It is the responsibility of a moral government to invest in the future of its students and the future of all of its residents. And I think that certainly it's a challenge, but it doesn't have to be. Once we solve the issues that we're facing now, we must continue to be proactive and not simply reactive to the issues that we face. When we become proactive, these issues won't be there in the future for future generations. And that's really how I see county government and government at all levels that's done responsibly, is one that is solving problems for generations to come that haven't even been born yet.
Mr. Wamp, the biggest challenge and how to combat it?
I think our biggest challenge, you see it on two sides. Politicians often talk in kind of the esoteric, the words economic development, politicians love those. And so this big picture, in a very real way, we've got a deficient workforce. We've got incredible quality of life, one of the great communities in the country, but it's very difficult to hire in a whole lot of different industries. And you talk to just about anybody that's trying to grow a business here, and you've got workforce shortages. But you also talk to the Chamber of Commerce about companies that are considering Chattanooga. And even Volkswagen's been pretty transparent in their consideration of expansions that our workforce is limited. We don't have a well-trained workforce. That connects directly with, I think, the greatest human challenge we have, which is a whole lot of hopeless teenagers. And particularly hopeless teenage boys end up wreaking havoc. And I think that's probably a story as old as time. But it's one that you see play out in national headlines when there's a shooting in Chattanooga, and obviously it's been a difficult summer. And so I think if we're willing to, and I think there's a really unique opportunity for the county mayor to lead this, but if we're willing to specifically challenge our public school system to produce great citizens and to serve students well, regardless of whether they came up in a privileged family or whether they had been well served in their earliest years, if we're willing to meet every young person where they're at and coach them along and love them along and train them towards a career, I think you lower crime, you develop an extraordinary workforce. That's where you really unleash the potential of Hamilton County, Tennessee, is by focusing as much as we can on a day in, day out basis. And it's hard, difficult work. And the challenges in Sale Creek are different than they are at Howard, or they're different at Ottawa than they are at Lookout Valley. But well, I think that's the calling. And you'll see all ships rise if we're willing to go and fight for kids all the way through graduation day.
Mr. Wamp, we stick with you, and this may be somewhat related, but in a different sense. We're dealing with inflation. There are cries that recession may be next. If you're elected Hamilton County Mayor, how will you spur the economy? How do you plan to promote and support a vibrant economy for this area?
It comes back in many ways to workforce. Our community's proven to be somewhat inoculated from economic downturns. If you just look at what the big industries are, the durable industries here, healthcare, logistics, a lot of these are not going to be affected as much as other communities would. And that way we can we have this mid-sized economy has insulated itself pretty well from a severe downturn. But I think it's that willingness to go and bet big on our young people, on our future. This is not rocket science. We've just not, in my lifetime, really committed to it well. There's a lot of lip service paid to public education. I think one of the things I've got some pride in is I feel like our campaign going back to October has brought back to the forefront the concept of vocational education. Think of it how you want to, career and technical. A lot of times I just refer to it as career training. We've got to be willing to go in at a really beginning in later elementary school and middle school and explain to our kids, no matter where they grow up or the affluence of their family, that career prep is every bit as dignified as college prep. And frankly, having a set of skills is the most realistic path, not just to a stable income that allows you to raise a family well and give back to your community. It's also the most realistic path to entrepreneurship. And so, as we look to the future, who knows whether we're headed into a recession, whether 9.1% inflation is sustainable. I sure hope not. It's going to be very difficult to build some of the schools I'd like to build if I'm county mayor, if everything continues to cost year over year 9% more. And I'll say as a dad of four, I don't know about y'all out there, but 9% inflation doesn't quite feel like what we're dealing with. I'm asking, where's the parents of multiple kid inflation number? Because it's a lot higher than 9% right now. But I don't think it ought to slow us down from focusing on the most important role of county government as I see it, and that's preparing our teachers, serving our teachers so that we're preparing our young people for productive lives.
Mr. Adams?
We're all feeling the effects of inflation, and that's no surprise to anyone in this room. And the fact is, the place that we feel inflation the most, whether we like it or not, is at the gas tank. Gas is at an all-time record high in the United States. It's gone down for 20 straight days, but we're not sure exactly how long that's going to be maintained. One way we can fight inflation for everyday residents is making sure that we're investing in cost-effective, efficient public transportation. As it stands, a 31-day pass on CARTA costs $50 a month. The average American is spending over twice that on filling up their tank filling up their fuel. They are spending money on rising insurance costs. And simply put, if we are investing in public transportation, we are alleviating the long-term burden of inflation on our residents. Now, we as a county are going to have to fight inflation costs when it comes to construction and economic development, certainly. But I believe that the single biggest way we can fight inflation for all of our residents in the immediate is investing in efficient public transportation across Hamilton County.
Mr. Adams, we'll stay with you. And you've both mentioned education, workforce, you've mentioned public transportation. This may coincide with that, but the question comes, what is a project or cause that you'd like to champion or promote if you're elected mayor?
Yeah, public transportation.
Okay. Do you want to expound or you want to leave?
Yeah, no, I will expound just a bit. So recently, a few years ago, UTC School of Design did a study on what it would look like to expand CARTA's operations within its existing framework. It really wouldn't cost a whole lot of money, and we've got money in reserves to be able to offset a lot of the costs at the county level. I spoke to the mayor of Chattanooga a few weeks ago, and he said, Matt, the fact is the R in CARTA is missing. The regional part of CARTA is missing. He said, when CARTA is getting phone calls on a daily basis from Saudi Daisy, from Ooltewah, from Hickson, because these folks can't get a ride on a bus, or they can't get a ride from Caravan, we are doing a disservice to our residents. We can expand within its existing framework, But in the short term, we can also partner with companies like Via out of Canada, which provides commuter service in partnership with local public transportation services. So that will alleviate the need for fixed routes and also be able to expand operations to residents who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to be able to utilize those services. So that there are certainly ways we can do it long term. We can also partner with state legislature to receive grant funds. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the bipartisan infrastructure deal has earmarked funds for expansion of public transportation across the country. So that is certainly the big project I want to champion for Hamilton County.
Mr. Wamp, any project or cause you'd like to champion as mayor?
I've got a lot, but there is one big one. This is the dream, and this has been my dream for a decade. Chattanooga, in its renaissance, left behind public education. And I know I'm on Signal Mountain, but I'm going to talk about Chattanooga specifically because I think what my dream is would serve students on this mountain quite well. If you go back to 1992, we raised in the name of development Kirkman High School. In 1999, we closed City High School. Now, City's facility still functions as a wonderful magnet school, but unless your kids are super talented, they might not get in. But in that meantime, you've had incredible growth and plans for a whole lot more residential growth close to town. So many of mine and Shelby's friends and peers, we live about 8 minutes from downtown in Lookout Valley. Chattanooga's become a magnet for all of us, and so many young families want to live in proximity to downtown Chattanooga. But what I've been a part of time and time again in the private sector, I talk to friends in business who encounter this all the time. You come to Chattanooga, world-class mid-sized city, unbelievable quality of life. You know, when the sun's setting, the place looks like a postcard. But there's nowhere in the city of Chattanooga, in all these contiguous communities to our downtown, North Chattanooga, Riverview, downtown, Southside, St. Elmo, Lookout Valley, there's not an excellent public school option in one of the great mid-sized cities in the country. And there's a legacy of outstanding public education right there in the city center. You could go and get trained up in one of about 20 different shops at Kirkman. You could go do whatever you wanted to in your life. Ask Bob Corker from City High School. And I think we could kill two birds with one stone and have a world-class career and college prep high school downtown. And the effects of it would be extraordinary. It would be, the investor in me speaking, the greatest investment this community would make would be to build a large, high-capacity school that would be open. It'd be open enrollment. Our whole school system's open enrollment. It'd be open enrollment to every student across the county if you want to come. But we'd be sending kids to college and sending kids out into the workforce under the same roof.
We've had a nice, polite discussion thus far. We're going to wrap up a get-to-know-me section with a question that came from someone who maybe wanted to see you two mix it up a little bit more. So put on your boxing gloves, just being silly here. What sets you apart, Mr. Wamp, from your opponent?
Listen.
And what would make you a better mayor than Mr. Adams?
Well, first of all, we've got a few weeks to go, so he may prove me wrong, but I've done 5 or 6 forums with Matt. Matt's a gentleman. He's a nice guy. The biggest difference in the two of us is I've lived here my whole life. I got an accelerated track in business because I got to go to work at 23 with some of the great entrepreneurs in our community, and I'd grown up really around architecture and politics, and so to dive into business at a pretty high level as really a fresh college grad changed a lot of my life in my 20s, and then to, you know, build a house, settle down in Lookout Valley, have a big family for a young guy, you know, learned a lot of lessons, good ones, tough ones, bad ones. And so, you know, it's funny. I mean, the night after I won the primary, one of the TV stations was over at my house. I've not said this in front of Matt yet. And they asked me some question about the race and moving forward. And I said, listen, one thing I'm excited about is I have always been the young guy. I've always been on the defensive about how young I am, on and on and on, just trying to work my way out of convincing people, you know, just try to work my way to a place where people think I'm not too young. And I'm now the sage, man. I'm like the old man here. I've got the gray hairs on the side to prove it. And Matt's got a lot of energy, but by comparison, you know, I've been around a long time.
Mr. Adams, the gauntlet's been dropped.
Yeah, no, so I was talking with a reporter the other day, and I said, regardless of who wins, we will be the youngest person on the county commission dais. I think the youngest county commission candidate is maybe 40 or 41 years old. So no matter which one of us ends up victorious in a few weeks, we will be the youngest person. I will say, my background is a little closer in relation to a lot of residents here in Hamilton County. We grew up, and we like I said earlier, we didn't have a lot of money, and so we were told to give back our time. I grew up on a farm in East Tennessee, not too far from here, and was involved heavily in my community and in my church. But after a very long day of being involved in my community and my church and working a part-time job, if the sun was still up when I got home, my boots came on, and I was out checking the fence to make sure the cows hadn't got out. And I still have to do that if I'm on the family farm at any point. So that did not stop when I was in high school. But I've also worked very hard to get to where I'm at today. I was, again, appointed to several positions in the Army where I was the youngest, most junior ranking person because I was entrusted by my leaders. And I think that my background and my experience professionally, personally, again, resonates with a lot of folks, and people can really relate to my background. And I think that, like Weston said, I've been a gentleman, he's been a gentleman. I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. I think that at the end of the day, whoever is victorious, I think will do right by the county. But again, I think that my experience, my background is that of someone that is more closely related to the residents of this county.
Good thing we have security here this evening. This could get a little heated up here. Thank you both. Let's move on to the intricacies of county business here and see what we can find out about something that's really centered here on the mountain. Mr. Adams, there's currently an effort to coordinate planning and development in the Walden's Ridge community between Signal Mountain, Walden, and unincorporated Hamilton County. There are three little parts to this question. First, what steps would you take to support Signal Mountain, Walden, and unincorporated area plateau-wide goals? What's the appropriate role for the regional planning agency? And what are your priorities for development and balancing quality of life, both Walden's Ridge and the county in general? And if I need to go over any of those three kind of questions there, sub-questions, let me know, but if you would.
Yeah, so I've had the opportunity to travel all around the globe and all around the United States as a result of my military service. And I've spoken to a lot of folks across the country and around the world who have told me that they've moved from certain places when the development, the long-term development of their communities and their neighborhoods was no longer sustainable, that their community and their neighborhoods were growing faster than the neighborhood wanted, that it was growing faster than the infrastructure could support, and it was growing faster than the municipal government and higher up wanted as well. So I have that perspective on things, and I know that I believe that the Regional Planning Commission has the role to make sure that in consultation with municipal governments and with the county government is making sure that we are developing the county sustainably, making sure we have the necessary infrastructure in place, making sure that we aren't encroaching on space that is very important to neighborhoods, very important to the community. And that's no different here on Signal Mountain and Walden's Ridge. I think that we need to make sure that we are developing the entire county sustainably for the betterment and welfare of every resident of Hamilton County.
Mr. Wamp, should I repeat any of those three subsections?
Well, I'll do my best.
Okay.
And then you just determine whether you think I capture enough of it. Like I said, I mean, this is an extraordinary community, and if you're young in this county, especially if you're getting up on having school-age kids, you see a whole bunch of your friends. I spend more time than I ever have in my life up here just because so many of our friends have migrated this way for either Thrasher or Nolan. I think particularly the unincorporated part of this mountain might be the most exciting part of the county for residential development in the next decade, because I intend, if I'm county mayor, to, between the regional planning agency and even the highway department that has a surprise, the county highway department that has a surprising amount of oversight, the way the communities come together. I think we ought to explore, particularly given the beauty of the mountain, what it looks like to get back to developing sustainable communities. There are a lot of them in this county, but to get away from cookie cutter subdivisions and really try to build for the future. I've said for months that I'd hope that one of the staples of my time in office, whether it's a project that is greenlit through county government or whether it's a project that county government brings out of the ground, that we would not only not be worried about the political consequences a couple years down the road, but that we'd dare to think a half a century or century out. There are some plans, some friends of mine who are developing some acreage on the back of the mountain have that I think is a kind of community that could be here 100 years from now. Let's conserve land and do it right and build sustainable communities. The Regional Planning Agency and Commission, I think it has basically been controlled by people who are in the industry. It's kind of a rubber stamp. So I look forward, as I have opportunities if I'm elected, to put some people on there who are competent, who've got a healthy perspective, but aren't people who are just kind of playing the game. What's the third question?
Third question is, what are your priorities for development and balancing quality of life for Walden's Ridge and the county in general?
Well, I've run out of time, but we got to probably do some road work, and if we're going to develop, as I think the hopes are, the rest of the mountain.
You mentioned the Planning Commission. That was the next question. The person writing in says it consists of majority members whose occupations involved in construction or real estate benefiting the approval of rampant building without addressing infrastructure. How will you, as mayor, combat that, or is that something that you're okay with? I think you answered that halfway.
Yeah, I did. Well, it's sort of boring if you think about it, to have people, in effect, overseeing an industry who come from that industry. And I don't know that we've done a great job. In fact, I worry that in the southeast corner of this county, we've done a very poor job planning, and we haven't been good stewards of the land, and we haven't been willing to invest in infrastructure in a scalable way. And so, again, I want competent people, thoughtful people, but I think there's an opportunity for folks to serve and serve well on the Regional Planning Commission who bring an entirely different perspective to the table. And you know what? Like, all ships will rise. If we challenge developers to be more creative and to be better stewards, it's better for the community that my kids will grow up in.
Mr. Adams, your thoughts on the Planning Commission and its composition?
Yeah, I think that to make sure that we are being proactive with county government and with long-term development, because that's really what it's about, right? Long-term sustainable development of Hamilton County. We need to make sure that we are engaging our community more properly and more efficiently. And if we are going to maintain the status quo, which I have no intentions of, but if we're going to maintain the status quo of having industry leaders on the Regional Planning Commission, then the very least we can do is have proper, efficient community input into planning and development of Hamilton County, because we don't have the infrastructure in place in a lot of places across the county to be able to meet the needs of rampant, unsustainable, unadulterated development. And we need to make sure that we are getting the input of the community and the input of our neighbors to make sure that we are doing what is right by everyone in this county.
Mr. Adams, expansion of sewer facilities has been a source of tension in the county. The need appears to be broadly accepted. What would you do specifically to expand the availability of sewer access to rural areas of Hamilton County? And what do you see as the best way for the county to work with the city of Chattanooga, which controls the Moccasin Bend sewer plant?
Yeah, I think I've always found it to be a little ironic that that wastewater treatment is a point of contention. I'm probably one of the younger people in the room here, but I would say that I don't want to go back to a time before we had indoor plumbing and before we had working wastewater treatment facilities. So it boggles my mind that it's a point of contention. I understand that the infrastructure needs of wastewater treatment it can be a point of contention. But the reality is we need to be working in lockstep with the city of Chattanooga, and we need to be looking at long-term the sustainability of Moccasin Bend and long-term building a second wastewater treatment facility so that we can we can have the infrastructure in place to be able to develop the rest of Hamilton County and to be able to accept new residents, accept new businesses, accept new industries. We talk a lot, my opponent, Weston and I talk a lot about economic development. Well, you can't develop the economy of your community if you don't have the necessary infrastructure in place. And that starts at the most fundamental basic needs, wastewater treatment and water. If you don't have those, nothing else matters. So long-term, we need to be working in lockstep with the city of Chattanooga to meet their needs and to meet the needs of Moccasin Bend, and then also making sure that we are looking at developing a second wastewater treatment facility to meet the needs of our growing community.
Mr. Wamp?
Well, I'll give you a different perspective. I'm a city of Chattanooga resident and a county resident, but oddly enough, it's almost a trivia question. I'm a WWTA customer. There's a few of us who live in the city of Chattanooga. Here's a question for you. We don't really think about EPB when we're asking city mayoral candidates questions. We don't say, well, what do you think about electricity rates or cable TV? Do we? And I think one of the reasons for that is because EPB has been treated like the autonomous entity that it is. The WWTA is structurally the same way, but it has become, intentionally so, a political animal, and I intend to depoliticize it to the best of my ability. I've sat with the officials at the WWTA and even challenged them on how the traditions became so far off base, and it's because the politicians didn't want the blowback from it. But guys, you certainly cannot sustainably go cheap on wastewater. And on some level, we just got to trust the WWTA, the board members, and then the professionals who run it to make tough decisions and charge us based on the services provided. And again, I think in a lot of ways for many of us, EPB is an interesting way to think about it. But for some reason, WWTA, despite having that autonomous charter, is controlled more than it should be from the county mayor's office.
Mr. Wamp, we'll stay with you. New development, be it residential, commercial, or industrial, increases the burden on schools, roads, sewer systems, and other infrastructure. Impact fees are currently severely restricted or not allowed in the state of Tennessee. Would you be in favor of impact fees, and would you be willing to work to change current law to offset some of the increased costs currently shouldered by taxpayers when development occurs?
Yeah. Listen, I think realistically, if you just go look at one of the neighborhoods in Appleton, and they're kind of a dime a dozen, if you go put an impact fee on those, that impact fee is going to be passed on to the person buying the house. I think there's a way that we can, part of it is just through challenging developers to do things a better way and invest in the schools in their area. And I've got a lot of thoughts about how we bring the private sector into investing in an appropriate way in our public school system. I'm not convinced that impact fees are the answer, because I think at the end of the day, you're just going to have sort of X impact fee added on to. I could imagine it being a line item with the builders locally. So I don't know that that's the solution, but I certainly, we all have to recognize that the unchecked growth, and I don't want it to end up this way on the mountain, but you've got unchecked growth in a couple corridors of the county, and it is. I think that the current administration has looked at it as a necessity because we have the lowest millage rate in 70 years, and so to pay the bills, growth is a good thing. Growth is a good thing, but it's gotten to a point where a lot of the people who live in the middle of that growth are kind of quite miserable and resentful of it.
Mr. Adams, impact fees.
Impact fees can be certainly directed to specific types of developments. And so if we're doing that, if we're directing impact fees to specific types of developments that have the largest impact, the most volatile impact on our infrastructure without addressing those needs, then we certainly will see long-term benefits of that. There are certainly other programs, other tax programs and things like that that can help to offset the costs of the impact on our infrastructure that development causes, specifically with regards to commercial and industrial development. And I think we need to be more creative with how we are offsetting the costs from our taxpayers to developers, whether that be commercial, industrial, or residential, to make sure that they are not just coming in for their own interests, but they're coming in for the interests of every resident of this county to make sure that we can see long-term sustainable growth, but also long-term sustainable opportunities for all of our residents. And when developers are coming in and they're not helping to offset those costs, whether that be through impact fees or other programs, then we are taking away opportunities from residents, because again, it does come back to the taxpayer, and we are continuing to push that burden off of the developers who are causing the issues to begin with.
Now to a specific problem that leads to a broader question. Mr. Adams, we'll start with you. One person writes that a solar company has identified Hamilton County as a major inhibitor to progress. It's been nearly a year, and this person's solar power system has not yet been commissioned. As mayor, what is your stance on solar for private use, and what would you do to streamline the process?
Yeah, I think that solar power has been another one of those points of contention for our country for a long time. Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House, and they haven't been on the roof since then. But I think that we owe it to the residents of this county to allow them to be creative with how they want to fight inflation, how they want to be able to provide energy costs to or provide energy to their home. We've seen rising costs in everything throughout the last 2 years, with no point that it's going to slow down. I think that it is the responsibility of a sound government, of a responsible government, to make sure that we are working with our residents, to make sure we are helping them to provide opportunities. And I believe that lifting some of the barriers that we have for solar panels, for solar energy here in Hamilton County, is certainly going to provide opportunities for folks here in this county.
Mr. Wamp, solar power for private use.
Yeah, I don't think customer service is a hallmark of county government right now. It's probably a byproduct, frankly, of the fact that we haven't had a true transition in county government in 28 years. I'm not one of these people who believes that term limits is a cure-all, but one of the reasons we decided to make the commitment on the front end that if we got elected, we wouldn't do it for more than 8 years, and that we would try to statutorily change the expectations, is because you don't have to talk, you don't have to go ask a whole lot of people to find some who've had a poor customer service experience with county government. And we ought to make it as easy as possible to take yourself off the grid if you want to go solar. It seems obvious.
Mr. Wamp, we'll stay with you. Do you support the use of public funds and tax breaks for the development of a new baseball stadium on the old U.S. pipe factory site?
I love to laugh. I live about 5 minutes from Wheel & Foundry. Dream dreams with my grandfather, who was a prolific architect, about what might come of that site. Can't wait to the day we see it developed. Hope, if I win, to be a great partner with the city in bringing some sustainable, beautiful development that's a great reflection of this community there. I'm a big baseball fan. I'm also a former investor. I wouldn't invest my own money in baseball if I were candid. Certainly would invest in minor league baseball. But I have questions about the multi-use stadium may very well enable us to find a path forward, even if it's not minor league baseball down the road. But I've got a lot of questions. I think taxpayers deserve a more transparent process. I was a part of a community meeting that Mayor Coppinger and Commissioner Fairbanks held in Sale Creek. That was really a gold standard for how this ought to work. It was about the McDonald's site a few months ago. And I mean, they took every last question from angry citizens, excited citizens. This proposed baseball stadium is not just a baseball stadium. It's the largest bond-funded project our community's ever considered, and it'll soon go to a vote. A couple low-hanging fruit items. Most people I talk to, almost all the people I talk to, would feel better if the Lookouts had any money in up front. It's somewhat unusual that there's not any money in the deal from the Lookouts up front. And also, the stadium up the road in Knoxville got $13.5 million of state funding. We could get $13.5 million of state funding. I mean, I'm not a big fan of it, but I'm just saying if you're going to do it right, and de-risk the thing for Hamilton County and City of Chattanooga taxpayers, which we could do. I think if we put together a better plan than just the one sketch that's been put out there, I think we could get the state of Tennessee to invest.
Mr. Adams, tax breaks, public funds, new baseball stadium.
Now, you want to talk about a point of contention, Greg?
Here it comes.
I've said from the very beginning of this campaign, there are two things that get me out of a room faster: a new Lookout Stadium and Metro government. But I promise I'll stay and answer this question. So I think that there are certainly issues that need to be fleshed out with the proposed plan for the Wheeland Foundry site. But on the flip side of that, that site's been undeveloped for almost 20 years now. We owe it to our community to develop that site into something that will bring in revenue for our schools, that will bring in revenue for our community, that will allow each one of our residents of Hamilton County and surrounding counties in the entire metro area to work, live, and play. And it being a multi-use stadium, it's not going to shut down when the baseball season is over, and that's what's on paper. But I will say, I hear a lot about the Lookouts and their payment towards this project. The reality is the Lookouts pay a higher price in lease for the use of the stadium than any other minor league baseball team in the country. That lease price is actually going to continue to increase under the current plan. There are still some issues that need to be, again, fleshed out, as you know, that being one of them, what that actually is going to look like long term. But we also need to be looking at two other major issues with this project, and that is, what are we going to do with the current site of AT&T Field, and what are our plans for public transportation to and from the new site for the stadium. And if we're going to make sure that we are working to develop this site and we're developing it for the opportunities for every resident, then those are two things that we have to make sure that the community has involvement on, input on, and is part of the decision-making process.
Hey, I'll take my minute here if I
Sure.
can get an extra minute. Obviously, I got thoughts on the subject. The $1 million, a lot of this deal is modeled after Knoxville. So Knoxville's trying to build a AA stadium right now. They're just about a year earlier in the process. Similar situation. They got a county mayor, city mayor, interlocal agreement that created a sports authority. And they've committed this $1 million a year. Now, the $1 million a year is not just the Lookouts renting the place. That's Lookouts ownership, leasing all aspects of the facility. It entitles them to revenue from all other community events. If you want to rent it out for your kid's birthday, money goes to them. If Rihanna comes and does a concert, money goes to them. But just we've got an apples-to-apples comparison that I think we just ought to use to be prudent. And don't forget 9.1% inflation, okay? This thing's not going to cost what we think it's going to cost. But even if we were to look up the road at the deal underway, there's $5.8 million of upfront cash from Randy Boyd, who's the owner of the Smokies, and $1 million a year. We don't have the 5.8, nor do we have the 13.5 million in state money. And I think with a little bit of diligence, we could de-risk the thing by $20 million.
Mr. Adams, would you like your minute for rebuttal there?
No,
Okay.
I'm good. Like I said, point of contention.
I understand. One last question in the intricacies of county business here, and Mr. Adams, we'll start with you. And a perfect question for the MAC here tonight. How do you plan to better support and fund the arts in our county?
Yeah, arts are something that are very near and dear to my heart. I got into photography at a very young age and found it to be very therapeutic, and found it to be something that allowed me to express myself, but also give back to my community. And I think that a lot of students in Hamilton County, not just students, a lot of adults find art to be very therapeutic. It's something that I believe we do an okay job as a county when it comes to investments in the arts community as a whole, but we certainly can do better. I think that's kind of the point that I've been trying to make this entire campaign is there are certainly things we do well in this county, but there are always things we can do better. And I think that the funding and the support of arts programs in Hamilton County is certainly one of them. Over $100 million a year comes in from the arts community. We have some of the most beautiful murals in the Southeast here in Hamilton County, and we are able to do that because our county government and our multiple municipalities provide funding for the arts programs. We need to make sure that we're also bolstering partnerships with organizations like Arts Build that provide arts programs for our students and also arts programs for for adults in the community. And we need to also make sure that we're bolstering partnerships with organizations like the MAC here on Signal Mountain to make sure that we can leave a lasting legacy of culture for the next generation and generations to come.
Mr. Wamp, how about the arts?
Well, it's just 3 years ago that we ensured that every elementary school student in this county was going to have an art class once a week. There's still some art teachers who are shared, so we've got some headway yet to make. I think Matt's probably right. There's some important therapy here that some of our most challenged neighborhoods would benefit from beyond elementary school. When I think about the arts and county government, I think the focus ought to be within the public school system, in part because county government is not just the other form of government from your municipal forms of government. It's different. It is, like I describe often, state government carried out at a local level. It's your essential services. It's a court system. It's public safety. It's a school system. It's not everything. You know, you get the bells and whistles if you choose to live in a place like Signal Mountain. This thing's owned by Signal Mountain. It's leased for $1 a year, I learned earlier, and you got a wonderful art center. I live in the city of Chattanooga, pay a lot of taxes to live in the city of Chattanooga now. And you know, rightfully so, you do. You get more ornaments on the tree. And then, you know, I think there's a lot of people who live in the unincorporated parts of the county who are just fine with their relatively meager government services, and they pay different level of taxes. So I'm not sure that the county needs to spread its mission, particularly because we've not, in my lifetime, I think, done public education as well as we should.
We have reached the end of our first hour. Thank you, gentlemen, for having the engines running up here. And now that you're warmed up, let's get into education. As you mentioned, Mr. Wamp, let's start with you. What are your views on public schools versus privately sponsored for-profit charter schools which use public funds?
Well, they're both public schools, in my opinion. I think of charter schools as public schools. I think they ought to have a little more oversight. It's funny, I mean, sometimes you'll hear conservatives argue that charters have more oversight. I'm not sure that's true in this community. Frankly, we've got kind of an underperforming charter school here that deserves more scrutiny. I'm a believer in and a product of one of our great public elementary schools. And so, you know, my heart of hearts, I'm a champion of traditional public schools. Now, what I love is that we've made this bold decision as a county, and a lot of people don't know about it, but as of this fall, I mean, we're a month away from school starting, and we're an open enrollment school district. Now, it comes with a lot of transportation challenges, and I think one of the most kind of profoundly important challenges that we could take on would be to figure out how do we enable disadvantaged students to have transportation access to the schools that they now have access to. But you have access now as a Hamilton County student to any Hamilton County school. There are open enrollment seats, and a bunch of them, I think there were 80 total at Signal Mountain Middle High School, or actually just in the high school. Maybe the middle school had additional slots. A lot of our greatest schools had capacity. And so, you know, I'm not opposed to charters. My former business partner, Ted Alling, has sunk a good part of his fortune into a wonderful charter school that serves a lot of young boys well at Chattanooga Prep. I'd love to see other entrepreneurs step forward and with a vision for theirs is not a for-profit. And so I'd say I've got some skepticism about for-profit charters, and I think we all should. And we all should hope that charters and our public schools all face scrutiny and high standards.
Mr. Adams.
For-profit charter schools, for-profit schools receiving public funds that would otherwise go to public schools, traditionally public schools, are antithetical to the state constitution. We're required in the state constitution, the state is, and local municipal government or local governments, to fund public education. And again, it goes in the face of the idea of public education for us to be providing funds to for-profit schools for our students. Now, there are plenty of for-profit schools across the country that do not receive funding from the state, funding from the county, and funding from cities across this country that do wonderful things. But they do that untethered from the state and local governments. We need to make sure we are investing in the long-term success of every student in Hamilton County. We need to make sure that we are not divesting any funds, whether that, and I will say, as just on a personal note, I believe that the state needs to make sure that they are not divesting funds from public education into for-profit charter schools, because again, it goes against the state constitution to do so. So we need to make sure that we are being good stewards not only of the funds that we receive, but also good stewards of the long-term educational success of our students.
We'll stay with you, Mr. Adams. This person picking up on a story that's been in the news for the past week concerning charter schools. Governor Lee invited a private religious out-of-state college to create 100 profit charter schools in Tennessee. The president of the college recently made comments insulting teachers and teaching degree programs in the presence of the governor. The governor's refused to condemn the statements. The question is, do you support or oppose efforts to introduce to Hamilton County schools any charter schools and or curricula or any materials sponsored by this particular organization, Hillsdale College?
Well, first I'd like to say I took great offense to the comments made by Dr. Arnn, and I also took offense to the governor's lack of responsibility taken when he sat by and said nothing in response to those comments. My mother, who's in the audience tonight, taught preschool for several years. I saw her work her butt off for her students day in and day out. And I have the utmost respect for our teachers. I have the utmost respect for our public educators. So I just want to say publicly that I took great offense to those comments that were made. I don't believe that it is, again, I do not believe that it is responsible for Hamilton County to introduce for-profit schools. And the model that Hillsdale College has suggested is a for-profit model that will benefit the university that does not reside here in the state of Tennessee, and it will benefit people like Dr. Arnn. And I think that it is irresponsible for us as a county to even consider the introduction of such a charter school.
Mr. Wamp.
I didn't know who Dr. Arnn was, but his comments, especially if you go watch him, are just arrogant and totally out of touch and cringeworthy. And I think, frankly, as a result of those comments, the Hillsdale curriculum doesn't have much of a future anywhere in the state of Tennessee. I mean, I think you asked a question specifically about the Hillsdale curriculum here. You've already seen a school in Soddy Daisy walk away from it, Ivy Academy, and my hunch is Dr. Arnn's arrogance there is probably going to, you've got Republicans like Mark White, one of the great education leaders in our state from Shelby County, and he just said, game's kind of over when you make comments like that insulting the teachers of Tennessee, and I don't disagree with him.
Sticking with education, should government or government groups such as textbook committees endorse the removal of any books from public libraries or public school libraries?
Oh, I don't know. That's really a school board question. I'm not sure that's a county mayor question. Where's Tucker? The school board chair's here. Come on, Tucker. Just come on up here. You can answer that question. I don't know. Didn't you lead the... Listen, if Tucker's doing it, then there's probably a role for it to be done responsibly. But, cancel culture comes in a whole lot of different forms, and I'm not a big fan of it.
Mr. Adams.
As it stands, there are policies in place to allow for parents to tell librarians and teachers, hey, my child's not going to read about certain topics and not going to read a certain list of books. So I just think it's irresponsible for for one parent or a couple of parents to try to dictate what every student in a classroom has the ability to read or not to read. My favorite book as a child was a book called Maniac McGee. And it's number 7 on the National Library Association's list of most challenged books in America. And it's because it deals with topics like poverty. It deals with topics like race, and it deals with topics of oppression from people that are above you in society. And those are some really hard topics for children to grasp. But I read that book, and I was able to talk to my parents and say, hey, help me understand these. These are really difficult topics, but I like the general concept of the book, so if you could just help me. So I think we need to really encourage that conversation and that dialogue. To Weston's point, cancel culture comes in many shapes, sizes, and forms, and I think that making or allowing the minority to speak for the majority is just a symptom of cancel culture, unfortunately.
Mr. Adams, we currently have schools in the county that are not equal in equipment and supplies for students and in classes offered to the students. How could you work with the county school board and the administration of the education department there to see that classes and programs are offered to all students in Hamilton County?
Yeah, so I've said since the beginning of this campaign that when a student walks into a building that is quite literally falling apart, that student inherently distrusts the system, because they believe, well, if the people in charge don't have the wherewithal to invest in my school to the point to where it's falling apart, then why should I care? And then we sit back and we have politicians who wonder why those students in those schools have lower test scores and lower literacy rates. Well, it's because we have built a system that doesn't support them from the moment they walk through the doors. We need to be investing equitably in our maintenance budget. We need to be investing equitably in our construction budget for Hamilton County schools, and that's something we haven't been doing for a long time. For far too long, we've allowed certain zip codes to just kind of be left in the dust when it comes to investments from our county government. And I think it's been doing a disservice for our community for many, many decades, and we're unfortunately seeing the results of that lack of funding, that lack of equitable investments for those schools. So we need to make sure that we're investing long-term in the digital and physical infrastructure of our schools. We need to also make sure that we are investing in programs like Future Ready, which is a great program that does not exist in all of our schools, unfortunately, but we can certainly work to expand programs like that across Hamilton County to provide opportunities long-term for every resident and every student of Hamilton County schools.
Mr. Wamp, plans that all students could get the same services, same classes, same supplies?
Well, it's going to be exciting here in the next couple of years to see what the state's new funding formula ends up meaning down to a student and a school level, because I think it'll probably shore up some of those challenges. Right now, even, we initiated a program that pays teachers more to come into a real challenge school. So obviously, there are discrepancies and inequities across our school system, but we've put forward a pretty good effort, I'd say, in the last few years. Got a lot of work to do. Obviously, I'm a champion of us building some big, beautiful schools. I'd love for us to be one of the parts of the country where you drive through and you go, wow, what is that? That's a school. That's a Hamilton County public school. It's funny, I mean, when you think about building things for 100 years, I still, every time I drive by CSAS, the old Riverside, the old city, the original city high school, it still kind of evokes that pride, right? Because it was built right. But it's not that simple, because when I think about, and Matt said, talked about the unfortunately failing infrastructure of our schools. Tucker McClendon's been one of the real advocates pointing this out. But at the same time, Crystal Scarborough, the principal at CSLA, has been stuck in one of our very most disgusting facilities and performed, and her students and teachers have performed at a world-class level. So yeah, there's more to it than the building. I certainly would love in this community where we've got a legacy of private education, where if we're not willing to invest in our public schools, where the facilities are proud, then I don't think we're given an honest effort, but at the same time, there are examples of kids getting an incredible public education in this county in a failing school. In a failing school facility, and got a lot to learn from principals like Crystal Scarborough about how they've pulled it off.
We move now to crime, and just a couple of questions about crime in the county. Mr. Wamp, we'll start with you. Do you believe there's systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and if so, what policies will you pursue to combat it?
Well, at a local level, first of all, this is just completely outside the purview of the county mayor. I just want to say that on the front end. I mean, the county mayor's there to execute state law at a local level. We don't even have home rules, so we can't even create ordinances or laws at a local level. My sister would give a really fine answer to this question. As to whether there's systemic racism in our judicial system, or criminal justice system, I've seen studies, as many of you have, about some really unfair things that have been allowed to continue on in the federal system. I've never seen a study proving or disproving that there is systemic racism within the Tennessee state court system. So I just feel like that one's kind of outside the purview of the job I've signed up for. I am no legal scholar.
Mr. Adams, you care to take a swipe at that one?
Yeah, so my background is in criminal prosecution and criminal defense. Do not claim to be a legal scholar, but I do have a little bit of insight into this issue. We do have an issue with systemic racism in our court system across the United States. There's no one court system that is immune to the issue of racism. We need to make sure, and it extends into the Department of Defense, the court-martial system. A recent study was conducted by an independent watchdog that showed that that's the case even in the military court system. But we need to make sure that we are taking a holistic approach to our community and our neighbors. And when we are being proactive, we will see a drop in crime rates, no matter what type of crime that is. I agree this is out of the specific purview of the Hamilton County Mayor, but there are certainly steps to be proactive, to provide opportunities for folks to lower our crime rates and to make that less of an issue when we have provided those long-term opportunities for folks.
Along the same lines, no matter which of you is elected mayor, you'll be working with a new sheriff. What steps could be taken to decrease gun violence in the county, promote gun safety, if there's anything that the mayor's office can do for the county?
Yeah, so I've spoken for several months, really since the beginning of this campaign, about the need for a director of community engagement at the Sheriff's Department. I think that it is imperative that the Sheriff's Department is engaging not just with the municipal police departments, though that is very important, but also with the community as a whole. Several years ago, well, about 4 years ago, Nashville Metro Police Department implemented a director of community engagement and an office of community engagement, and they saw a decrease of violent crime in nearly 4%. They saw a decrease in gang-related incidents and gang involvement by 3%. Overall homicide rates went down by 19%. Their literacy rates went up by 4%. And that's just right up the road. There are several studies that have been done across the United States about the long-term and even short-term efficacy and improvements that a community engagement program can make with a law enforcement office at the sheriff's level, the municipal level. So I think that within the purview of the Office of County Mayor, I think that is something that we certainly need to look at, is investing in a Office of Community Engagement for our Sheriff's Department.
Mr. Wamp, gun violence in the county.
Well, just as a background on this subject, Matt heard me give the same answer this morning. I'm sensitive, particularly because we're about to have an eminently qualified new sheriff who spent most of his career with the Chattanooga Police Department. This is different than running for city mayor, where the police chief works at the pleasure of the mayor. It's not at all the case here. You've got a constitutional officer who's the elected head of law enforcement in the county. And I got a lot of confidence in that department. I think, an area of emphasis and passion for me that I've talked to both Austin Garrett about and the captain over uniformed services and the the leader of the SRO program, is I think your SRO program, which serves middle and high schools here, we now have SSOs, which is a program run by the school system in our elementary schools. That SRO program is probably as unique an opportunity as exists within law enforcement to really make a difference in gun crime, gang-related violence. It's so difficult in these communities. You may have seen coming out of that big shooting at Macaulay, on Macaulay Avenue, there's hardly anybody who's actually talked to police investigators. The relationships just aren't there. The trust is not there. And that's tough, but the unique opportunity that exists for those SROs is they are inside the walls of our schools, and they've got an unparalleled opportunity to coach, to participate in extracurricular activities, to build trust, to get to know family members. And that already happens a lot. I'm not talking about something new. I mean, often behind the scenes, a crime will be solved because of a tip that comes from an SRO. But, you know, I'd love to see your SROs be the highest paid cops in town. I mean, I think that ought to be the elite group in law enforcement, not just to protect from, God forbid, a threat, for an external threat, but even to really do deep relationship building in some of our most challenged neighborhoods.
If I may.
Certainly, for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that the role of the SRO is very much going to need to be the interaction with the students, the day-to-day interaction with those students, and not be a law enforcement officer to respond to discipline issues within our school. That should not be their sole priority. I feel like a lot of times and not specifically here in Hamilton County, but a lot of times we've seen SROs be that enforcer of discipline issues. We need to take a more steward approach towards discipline in our school systems, because when you treat a child like a criminal, they're going to grow up to think that they're a criminal. And so we have a moral obligation to make sure that that's not happening, and make sure that we are doing right by the long-term success of our students.
Mr. Wamp, you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll move on to the Health Department with a question that has two parts to it. Begins, the importance of the Hamilton County Health Department was brought to the forefront during the recent COVID pandemic, but the authority of the county health officers has been degraded by the county and the state. This question feels the value of the local departments also been diminished, with the position being left vacant from January 2021 until this month, in spite of applications by highly qualified candidates and by the appointment of a non-medically trained bureaucrat to lead the organization. The first part of the question is, what's your view on the role of the county health officer, and it's added, who is required by law to be a licensed physician?
Yeah.
Start with that.
Well, you know, either one of us is now going to inherit a new person. And I don't know I don't think you chose it, and I didn't choose it, so hopefully it was a good hire. We'll all see. The health department is, you're right, boy, we never knew how important it was. I think it was a crash course in civics, too, for folks in this state to realize that the big counties that had health departments were in a different position. I think of all the touch points in our community of county government, the one that has the most unrealized potential is probably the health department. Now, and that's not to say they don't do a great job as it is, I think they do. But you got clinics from Birchwood to Sequoia to Ottawa, obviously big facility adjacent to Erlanger. I think there's an opportunity for us to really challenge the health department to serve families in a way that connects directly into the public school system. We talk a lot about, and a lot of people commit their lives to trying to solve the conundrum of early childhood reading. We all know that if you're reading on grade level at third grade, your life's going to go very differently than if you're not. What I don't think we understand real well is that it's not in 95% of cases the fault of a teacher that a student's not reading at grade level. I mean, the vast majority of our teachers are doing their best against pretty steep odds in some cases. What I think we're beginning to realize academically, scientifically, is so much of what happens in our first experiences of life have everything to do with our long-term educational future. And that's where I think that health department, I say this as a young parent, I'd love for our health department to find unique ways to engage with new parents and explain to them, it may not seem like when you're changing diapers in those early days that there's a lot going on, but it's extraordinary how much brain development is going on, just by looking at your babies in the eye and talking to them and singing to them. And so I look forward to exploring all the ways that health department can serve our community in the years to come.
We'll stick with you, Mr. Wamp, just for the second part of this question. I'll ask the timekeeper to give them another 2 minutes.
Oh, gosh. I
Continue
won't
with
use
your
them.
answer there.
All right.
More specifically, do you think that the health department needs to be restructured and the leadership, and do you think it's important that the leadership's medically trained, a public health professional, specifically the county health officer?
Absolutely, whether the county health officer should be medically trained. Should the health department be restructured? I don't know yet. I've never worked in government, never worked in county government. I'm signing up for a job that I claim to be competent to do real well, but I'd be lying to you if I told you I know every answer. It's a big organization. The health department is surprisingly big, but county government's big. It's kind of like the highway department. I wouldn't be able to sit here and tell you a whole lot about how you pour asphalt, but I'll figure it out and try to be a good steward. But at this time, I wouldn't be able to speak with any real specificity about how the health department should be restructured.
Mr. Adams, we'll give you that question in two parts as well. First, your view on the role of the county health officer who's required by law to be a licensed physician.
Yeah, so as I've mentioned probably 172 million times at this point, my background is in the military. And as a result, my professional experience has been seeing a commander at the head of the table who has to be the most humble person in the room and say, hey, I am not an expert in every area, but you are an expert in your area and you're an expert in your area. I've said several times to folks, if someone claims to be an expert in everything and says they have the answer to every solution, to every problem that we as a county face, you need to run in the opposite direction as fast as possible, because they don't. They don't have the answer to everything. We need to make sure that our county health officer is a medically trained professional. The last 2 years have proven that. If nothing else, we need to make sure that we have a competent, professionally trained health officer leading the health department for the fourth largest county in the state. It is imperative to the long-term success of public health that we have a chief county health officer that is medically trained and able to solve the medical needs of Hamilton County.
And your thoughts on whether or not the county health department should be restructured, and especially the leadership?
I think that leadership in that area should not be done by a bureaucrat. I think that leadership in pretty much any department of government, not pretty much, no department of government should be done by someone who does not know how to lead that department. I'm not a law enforcement expert, so I'm not running for sheriff. I am not a medically trained professional, so I didn't apply to be the county health officer. But I do have leadership abilities, and I have the ability to listen, and I have leadership experience. And I believe that when you bring in professionals, when you bring in folks who are much more highly trained in their area than you are, I can tell you the different bones in my arm, but that's about the extent of my knowledge of the human body. So I'm not going to stand out here and say that I can lead the health department for this county. But I do know that it is imperative that we make sure that it is a trained medical professional who knows what is best for the public health of every resident of this county.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. We've reached the bottom of the hour here, and we're running into our last two questions that have been submitted prior to the event. They're going to deal with the elections, and I think we're going to have a couple of questions come up that were submitted on the way in. We'll get to the first question here first. Mr. Adams, this question seems to have been asked of candidates on the national stage and the state stage, and now down into the local stage of every election across the country. The question, do you believe the election of 2020 was an honest and fair election?
Yes. And the reason I say that is because every federal agency who had a hand in election security, who has had a hand in election security, whose directors were appointed by President Trump, claimed, and with strong evidence, that it was the safest, most secure election in American history. And I have no reason to disbelieve the evidence that has been presented for almost 2 years now to the American public.
Mr. Wamp, your thoughts?
Yeah, I have no doubt that it was a fair and honest election, but I think it's important that we approach that question with some humility, because it's really critically important that we all have confidence and faith in our elections. And the 2020 election was different, and it was carried out, in the middle of a pandemic. And so some states changed methods and even dates around voting, and so that's where some of the questions have come from. Obviously, there are some bad actors who intentionally want to manipulate information and distort and deceive. But at the same time, I think there's good people who have reasonable questions, and you can enter into a good faith conversation with them about what methods changed. And if you're not familiar, like in Tennessee, you can't, except under extenuating circumstances, you can't vote absentee unless you're over 65, I think it is. And so to explain to people what the verification processes and security protocols are around vote by mail, these are helpful conversations for us to have so that we move forward. What I'd hate to see is a pendulum start swinging where we don't trust our elections. I mean, our system of government provides for elections that are uniquely decentralized. They're virtually unriggable because you've got tens of thousands of jurisdictions across the country. It would be by far and away the greatest conspiracy in the history of man to rig an American election. But the subject is worth a lot of conversation, and we ought to, I think both parties and people who have no party affiliation, we all have an interest in reasonable election security measures so that everybody has confidence in our elections. In this county, we always have had honest elections.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm done.
I think that a lot of the questions that folks have stem from a lack of civics education at every level in this country. For far too long, we've done a poor job of teaching civics. We've done a poor job of teaching how voting works in this country, and how elections work, and how the Election Commission works, and the Secretary of State. I think we need to get back to that. Fundamentally, we need to get back to teaching civics and teaching the fundamentals of how our government works and how it operates, and how we get elected leaders and how our elections are to function at the city level all the way up to the election of the president and vice president.
And Mr. Wamp, finally, are there any measures that the county mayor can take to ensure access to voting and secure the elections? And if so, what are they? And also, are they needed in Hamilton County?
Yeah, I don't think they're needed because we haven't had any issues here. But I think we ought to, again, I think we ought to be sensitive to the subject, and we ought to hear people's concerns out. We ought to fully fund an election commission here that's always proven is competent. But it's not, we shouldn't rest on our laurels, because across the board, we probably do underfund elections. We don't get much help from the federal level, so it's basically paid for at a local and state level. But, there's not any major issues here currently.
Mr. Adams?
With regards to security, there aren't really any major issues with election security here in Hamilton County. One way we can improve access to the election box for residents of Hamilton County is making sure that our election commission is working with nonprofits across Hamilton County to register our high school seniors to vote. We don't have automatic registration here in Tennessee, and so a lot of folks I've talked to over the last several months have been teenagers, 18, 19 years old, 17, that will be 18 by election day, who didn't know how to register to vote, who didn't know where to go to register to vote. And so, again, it comes back to civics education. It comes back to really servicing all of our residents, starting at a young age. And then, again, increasing access. The role that we can play as a county is making sure that that we're working, the county commission is working with nonprofits and the school system to make sure that we register every student in Hamilton County schools.
And as we get to the end here, I want to take a moment to thank the MAC for putting on this forum. I want to thank you gentlemen for participating. Thank you all for sticking around on a warm evening on Signal Mountain. We have just a couple of questions left that were submitted this evening. And once again, these questions I presented were submitted, and our candidates had a chance to look them over beforehand. These will be brand new to myself and to them. A hand for Snowda for bringing those up. She hates being in front of people, so we'll give her applause while she walks back up the aisle here. Mr. Adams, we'll start with you. What is your plan to support schools in the handling of the current mental health crisis among adolescents and teenagers?
Yeah, so the mental health crisis that we have in Hamilton County is not operating in a vacuum. The mental health crisis we have among adolescents and teenagers extends across the United States. But making sure that we're funding mental health programs at the health department and also making sure that we're investing long-term in providing counselors, guidance counselors, and the like into our schools. We're on the right track to get to the state standard for the ratio of student to guidance counselor, but we're certainly not where we need to be. We need to be at that ratio or below that ratio so that we can make sure that our guidance counselors and mental health professionals in our schools aren't being stretched at absolutely the thinnest possible.
Young people with a dedicated person, just talking to them about their future career path and education path.
And finally, gentlemen, we'll start with you, Mr. Wamp. Affordable housing is vanishing across the state, yet many candidates in various races are not making it a priority. What factors do you think contribute to this issue, and what can the office of the county mayor do to address it in Hamilton County?
What contributes just to unaffordable housing? What's the question?
Affordable housing is vanishing.
Oh,
What
affordable
contributes
housing,
to
yeah.
affordable housing?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well, for one, we got to be willing in parts of the county where it makes sense and where the infrastructure is in place, we got to be willing to allow for density and some creative developments that baby boomers may not appreciate as much as I think some millennials would, just as a reality of how you create a home and an opportunity for people to buy affordably. I used this example this morning because we were asked about affordable housing, and 11 years ago, I bought the house that Shelby and I started our family in. Great little house, 1,600 square feet, 6 minutes from downtown. Bought it for $175,000. 11 years ago. It's unthinkable right now. That house is not very nice. It's worth like $500,000 almost. I don't own it. But there's no question. I mean, it's palpable. It's a very real thing. I think the county is, like I was talking about earlier, in planning in general, the county's got to play a more proactive role than it ever has. 80% of your new builds are in the non-municipal parts of the county as it stands. To me, this is an appropriate use of a TIF, where you can provide some tax relief to developers to give incentives to come in and build affordable housing. I'm all for that because it's certainly part of the community that I think we all hope Hamilton County is in the decades to come. It's a place where you can work hard and live the American dream, buy your own home.
And define TIF real quickly, if you would, for those who aren't in government on a daily basis.
We're going to end up back in talking about stadiums, but tax increment financing. I mean, basically going in. I mean, and you've seen some of this downtown. Mayor Coppinger's entered into a couple arrangements where the tax base in a certain area is going to be contributed towards a development.
Mr. Adams, how about affordable housing in the office of county mayor?
Yeah, affordable housing is a crisis in the United States. Again, it is not something that operates in a vacuum here in Hamilton County, and it's not an issue specifically to any one municipality or unincorporated Hamilton County. On any given day, there are approximately 25 to 30 houses available on the market for someone making the median income in Hamilton County, which means that most folks cannot afford to buy a house here in Hamilton County. And what ends up happening is we lose folks to live in North Georgia and work here, live in Bradley County and work here. And so we're losing a lot of revenue, frankly, when we're not working with developers, when we're not working with nonprofits. The city of Chattanooga has done a lot of really great work over the last year and a half to bolster the development of affordable housing units and to bolster partnerships with nonprofits to put folks on a path to home ownership, because unfortunately we have a lot of folks that are stuck in a cycle of renting. And so what ends up happening is, most folks that are renting, they're paying more for rent than they otherwise would be for a mortgage. But the nonprofits that we have here in Hamilton County, the resources we have here in Hamilton County, are stretched really thin to be able to provide the necessary resources for those folks who want to be put on a path to home ownership. And so it's the responsibility, the moral responsibility for the mayor and the planning commission to work with nonprofits and to work with developers and be creative as to how we address this issue, and be creative with tax incentive programs, with pilots and things like that, to make sure that we are doing what is right for every resident. I know I continue to say that, but it's so true. We need to focus on every resident, not one specific community, because I'm not running for mayor of Chattanooga. I'm running for mayor for every resident of Hamilton County.
Before we get to closing statements here, thank you both gentlemen for a very thoughtful conversation. A reminder to everyone that early voting begins tomorrow. It runs through Saturday, July 30th. In Hamilton County, the early voting polls are open Monday through Saturday. Election day is August 4th. If you didn't vote in the primary, you might go to the Hamilton County Election Commission website, and I think you have to put in the last 4 digits of your social security number just to make sure your polling place is the same as it was last time you visited. We thank you all for being here. Thank the MAC for putting this on. And for closing statements, Mr. Adams, I think you go first.
Yeah. So I would love every one of you all to support me in this race to make Hamilton County all it can be. It takes a village. I heard someone say that this morning, and I've heard it time and again on this campaign trail. It takes a village. No one person can do this alone. No one person can solve all of the issues that we face as a county. And I want to make sure that we can do it together. I want to make sure that if I get the opportunity to sit at the head of that table, that I'm listening to every person at that table and every person that comes in that room. I would be remiss if I did not thank my parents and step-parents for coming out tonight, so thank you very much for them. And thank you all for coming out tonight to engage in civics. I think this is a hallmark of democracy, being able to sit in front of candidates for public office and to hear their views and hear why they believe they should serve in that position. So thank you all very much, and thank you to the MAC, and thank you to Greg for moderating tonight.
Mr. Wamp.
Yeah, thanks again for having us. Just as a closing, I'll give you my hopes, if I'm elected, for the themes of my administration or time in office. One is just that I think that the greatest single investment we could make would be into orienting our public school system around preparing our young people for work, whether they end up going to college or not, or go to a couple years of college at one of our state's great community colleges, but that we equip young people to be good citizens and to have a set of skills that would just have such a cascading effect across society here in Hamilton County. I think we'd all be proud of those investments. Two is a theme I've talked about a lot here, and that would be that we don't get hung up on politics or even election cycles, but that we kind of dream big dreams for the future. We're willing to build things for 50 years, 100 years to come. And then lastly, and this was just kind of an approach, and I'll tell you, it's going to be very disruptive to county government the way that it's worked for most of my lifetime, but that we would take the work seriously, but not ourselves too seriously, and have some fun with it and maybe inspire some young people into a life of public service along the way. Thank you all.
We thank you, gentlemen, again for being here. We've invited them to stay and shake your hands. We would say please don't get them involved in long policy discussions. They both had a very long day bookended by debates like this. But thank you all for your engagement. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you on Election Day. Thank you.
Yeah, right.